So thank you very much for the organizer of this conference about this last session. In this last session, we are very pleased to welcome Professor CHOI, who is near me, and Professor ROSENBAUM. Thank you very much to be there. We know more or less the situation of public management in France with Professor BARTOLI. Obviously better, I hope so, than Korean situation. It's why I would like to propose to the Professor CHOI to begin and to make a presentation, a short presentation about the situation of public management in Korea, South Korea, obviously. And we are interested by the way that you organize the training, the way you organize research, the topic that you are interested by. We have a session with Korean colleague this afternoon, this morning, and it was very interesting for me because I discovered the links you have with the US way to make research and so on. It was very interesting point, so I would let you the floor about this point.
How many minutes I can? Okay.
I don't know.
I have a small PPT. Okay. I'll go over. Maybe this PowerPoint presentation is a little bit long, but so I could bear with me. I'll be skipping some of the pages, even though I prepared this for AIRMAP specifically. It's still long, I think. I'll be talking amongst the features of public management in South Korea. Especially about performance evaluation at the organizational level as well as individual level. And also, I like to, because in South Korea, government reform has been extensively kind of relied on the using of information technology. So IT-based reform has been very extensive. So that is another feature. But at the same time, I like to point out some of the performance evaluation that has been going on. Actually, the practice is there formally, but some part of it, which I suspect is ritualized. Because the individual-based performance, pay-per performance, is being challenged in South Korea. Some people are not sure whether that is really a good way of doing performance management in the context of South Korea. And I have some evidence about the ritualization of performance evaluation using the data of some public corporations. And in the end, I'll be pointing out maybe public management or NPM-based reform is not in itself enough. I mean, there is a growing need for reforming government, probably which can be only satisfied maybe by doing some more, maybe a political level intervention. So that I'll be concluding my speech using that. On this PowerPoint, I have a brief timeline of performance management in South Korea. It has been going on for many years, but a very important point was that South Korea was hit by financial crisis in '97. That was a single best, more important moment where South Koreans were really, kind of eager to start performance evaluation and performance management. At that time, the president, Kim Dae-jung, he actually had the central as well as the local government, so local and central government, to adopt modified MBO, management by objectives. It has been going on, it has been around for many years, but they had modified MBO, and then it was very much applied, not at all level of government at the time. And then later on, the MOGAHA is a Ministry of Government Administration and Home Affairs. It was Ministry of Interior. They started the evaluation of the local government. South Korea has a basic level local government of about 228, and then upper level 17. So all the both level of government had to be evaluated by the Ministry of Interior. That was one. And then they somehow overhauled the evaluation of the public corporations in 2004, and in the end, in 2006, they had a very comprehensive basic law for government performance evaluation, which still is in effect. So it is performance evaluation. Actually, there are many actors. Actually, the South Korean government is surprisingly fragmented, very much fragmented. Officially, the main actor for the basic law for government performance evaluation is the Prime Minister's office. But for example, the Ministry of Planning and Budget, they do evaluation. For the capital financing project, Ministry of Interior, they do the evaluation for the local government. Also, they evaluate the personal level performance as well. So this we have at the government level, we have organizational level, these two, financial, and also South Korea has a performance contract for the people with the grade 4 and up. They have a 9-grade system for the civil servant, and then the one being the highest. So 4 and up, you are supposed to have a performance contract. Then so they digitized everything. So each and every government public employees, they do have their own card where they have all the records. Records from individual level performance, records from others as well. And so, for example, this is an example of the job performance agreement. So for the Director General level, they have a so-called strategic objectives, and then for the directors, they have performance objectives. And then they have a pay scheme, which is to the pay scheme is varied, depending on the kind of performance level they are having on that scale. And then this is another presentation of the kind of systems they have. This is basically e-government system. E-IPSES is a central, the performance management, the DB, and then others are the performance-related databases. So very much they from A to Z, they are kind of relying very much on the e-government. Maybe somehow they feel it is easier for them to move on as they adopt this kind of digitized instrument. Maybe they are making the reform as a kind of as a more of an objective form. It's not. So they often rely on e-government. I'll be talking a little bit more about that. But when it comes, this is the part. The CHOI is me, and he was my student at the time, and he just finished up his degree from the Florida State University. He's still in the United States. I had several hypotheses which point maintains that to some extent, if your job is quite complicated or difficult to measure, your acceptability of a performance evaluation will go up as the performance evaluation will be ritualized. If you feel that your job is complicated enough, but still they apply to the strict regime of performance evaluation, their level of acceptance of a performance evaluation result will go down. That is the hypothesis that I had. So actually I had some conforming result. This is the result of structural modeling. So ritualization is constructed using 3 dimensions: evaluability, validity, and effect. So if you are evaluating the performance, which is not really very much evaluable, then then there will be some problems. So if you have this construct has these 3 dimensions. So and then people feel that even though they have the evaluation, they don't really agree, and then the indicator does not really reflect your performance. And then in the end, even though they do the performance evaluation, they feel that it's not really important in terms of applying the pay level, pay schemes. Then I would claim that the performance evaluation in your organization is to some extent ritualized. That's the way that I constructed this. And then that is the story about the performance evaluation. Another 2, I have 2 examples of using the information technology to reform the government. One is National Tax Service. They used to call it National Tax Administration, but they changed their name. There was some corruption scandals in the National Tax Administration. So there was an outcry on the part of a civil outcry for the reform. And then they did it. They adopted actually using ICT. One is a tax info integration system. The other one is home tax system. The other one is a public procurement system. What they did is this. They used to have an organization which is this is not really, is really a geography-based organization. So you are in charge of doing the taxation, for example, in certain segment of the city of Nice, and then you do the comprehensive job when it comes to the tax matters. For example, you do the investigation, you do the analysis, and then you do the collection as well. I mean, you decide how much you require the levy, and then you ask them to some people to collect, and then there is a big possibility that district tax officer can be bribed, and when if it's effective bribe, and then the tax will be reduced. From then on, from that kind of organization, they changed that geography-based organization into function-based. So here, some people within the organization will just do the analysis. Some people in the tax service will just do the investigation. Some people will just do the tax collection. But it will be a headache to coordinate those 3 different functions. So the organization should be more intelligent, smarter. So how do you make the organization smarter? That's the TIS, tax integration system. So that's the point where they rely more on the information system. And then also the citizen interface are all digitized. So in these years, when I do the tax reporting, I click 2 times if I want. If I want to examine more, I can click into. And then it has, of course, a problem of a big brother state. They know everything about my credit card spending. But it's on the National Tax Service server. I can take a look all the spendings that I did. So the privacy requirement should be very, very stringent. But anyway, that's the way they do business these days. That way, at least the petty corruptions on the part of the tax officers has been, I think, greatly reduced. Of course, they have a grander corruptions as well, still going on, but I suspect. But at least the petty corruptions are gone, I think. Also, public procurement service went through the very similar kind of processes. So, it's all in the system, and then the people can monitor. I mean, those who want to bid for that procurement can monitor who is having the contract. So it is pretty much transparent. Also, it is open for the international bidders as well. That is also a part of the reform after the 98 financial crisis. They had to open up the economy, and they had to open up their public procurement for foreign bidders as well. So these ones actually summarize the changes in the structure of organizations. There had to be some structural adjustment to that. So in the case of NTS, National Tax Service, is from geography-based to function-based structure. For public procurement service, it is more of from bureaucratic structure to team-based structure. This one has been published in my article. So I did all the data collection for this as well. But the thing is, will those the IT-based or performance the reforms and performance management be enough for South Korean need for government reform? I don't think so. And then, for example, it reflects more factors, but for example, the presidential approval rating in South Korea, when it comes to 4th year, their approval rating is about around 10 to 30%, very low. If it is in the United States, it will be really, really problematic. So people really do not trust government. I think this aspect is shared by most of the industrialized economies in East Asia. The situation is quite similar in Japan. Of course, Abe, Shinzo is an exception. Taiwan, the presidential approval rating is around 10%. Right now, China Ing-wen is a little bit higher than that. But still, that has been a kind of a normality in that part of the world. But it is not something that we have to always accept. There must be something that is going on. And then for South Korea, problem is that one of my colleagues in political science, who is retired, who has retired already, published a book titled Democracy after Democratization in South Korea. Democracy, the status of democracy in South Korea after democratization in 98 is not in good shape. He made a good point. The people thought after the democratization, our civil society will be stronger. The society will be much fairer. There will be more justice. Then people these days don't really believe that. situation has been worsened. Something is really going on. And then the NPM-based reform does not really address that. This is all the stories that I wrote. But the economic injustice is getting severer. And then I criticize, and it's the Lindblom's case seems not applying to in the case of South Korea. And then this is what I claim. We have to think in terms of two dimensions. One is output, government behavior. The other one is perception of the people, which we can think of it as an outcome. You do it, but that's one thing. How people perceive government was doing is another. That's what I'm claiming. In some cases, in some countries, in some companies, in some cities, government is doing well. They can be impartial, efficient, and responsive. And then people think you are doing okay. I claim in that case, that is the case where NPM is really, really working. You do the internal adjustment. You do the remedy. You develop remedy for the bureaucratic failures, which NPM is really, really geared for. But in some cases, especially I think in developing countries, government is not doing well, but the people tend to accept, not because they are stupid, but because they are rather, they are acquiescent, because they are busy, their living condition is getting better. For example, in China, they know everything, what the government is doing, but they are busy. Their life is getting better. So, but the thing, what is good in China is that the government, they know the clock is ticking. If they don't address the need for reform, there will be a disaster, governance disaster. So it will be a long-term disaster. So the Xi Jinping he's in a hurry to reform the government. That's another case. In the context of South Korea, or for that matter, I think Japan or Taiwan, the people who are in charge in the government think that we are doing okay, but people don't think we are doing okay. And then they stupidly sometimes think that citizens are not right. That creates actually some the confrontations. So that part has to be somehow addressed. The way they perceive. I mean, there is a big cleavage, I suspect, which I'm working on in my Center for Governance Design these days. I do, for example, compare the perceptions of the public employees and the citizens on the same matter. But that's what many people in PA in South Korea think what is going on. But to citizens' mind, I don't really think that the government or state has been doing very well. I mean, but it's not just the responsibility of the government itself. I mean, the economic injustice thing and then bipolarity. But anyway, people are not satisfied. But what I'm pointing at is that the place, locus, where NPM can be very effectively applied is limited. You have certain other situations where you have to somehow to use maybe a larger cast to make the effective reform of the state or the government. I think is needed in South Korea. So this one is just narrations of that. My point. I'm finishing up. The previous government, the Park Geun-hye, who was impeached. Her government reform agenda was government 3.0, and then I thought the direction was quite right. It is more of a citizen-centered, and then it is more geared for individual citizens, not citizen as a group, which is in need, I think, for South Korea. But it was done only at the operational level. And then they replaced this very nice scheme with the electronic government, which was, I think, a disaster. And then this is some of the contents of the 3.0. This is what they wanted to do. And I'll stop here. This is my university. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a lot of information now, and I hope that the text is in the USB key, perhaps? No? It's a pity, because we need to read the text absolutely after. Yeah, thank you very much. I will be lucky with that. So, as far as I understand, you have a very important process now with Government 3.0, with opening public data, as you mentioned.
Yeah, but it is in our history.
Yeah.
We have a new president. A new president, he just decided to shut down the committee for Government 3.0. He will be having another reform agenda. I think to some extent, and hopefully he will be addressing more of a political side as well, not just because one of the, for me, in my opinion, the Government 3.0 has been somehow the original point has been changed to become more into operational level reforms, which the people, citizens, doesn't care.
Now we can try to ask Professor Rosenbaum about this point, perhaps, about the reforms in US in public management.
Well, I guess I would say that the major achievement of new public management in the United States is that it gives professors something to talk about in their classes. Beyond that, quite honestly, I don't think it's had a lot of impact. Several of the different aspects of new public management have long been concerns in the United States and continue to be concerns, but they are not driven by new public management theory. These are concerns that are driven because they are historical kinds of concerns. If you look at the precise aspects of new public management theory, contracting out, for example, has long been an approach to government in the United States. Performance measurement is certainly something that gives scholars opportunities to write articles about in the United States, including one of my colleagues just had one of his articles cited in Barack Obama's last budget that he produced. But does performance management really have much impact in changing the way administrators do things in American government? I would argue no. Many people will write articles citing examples. For instance, I live in South Florida. There's a community there, Weston, which is frequently cited as a great example of the notion of contracting out government services. There are only about 10 employees of the entire municipality. And yes, it is a good example of contracting out of government services by municipal governments. It's one of 35,000 municipal local governments in the United States. The great thing about the diversity of American government is if you want to write an article on some reform, you can find somewhere in the 35,000 local governments that exist in the United States. Actually, 35,000 in a way is an underestimate. That's the combination of cities and county governments. If you throw in all the special districts, for instance, all the school governments, all of the other kinds of districts, we're talking 88,000 local governments in the United States. Among 88,000, you can always find a few examples to illustrate the fact that there is a profound revolution taking place in terms of administrative services. But my suggestion would be that that's not the case. Now, that's not that we don't talk about reforming government. Reforming government is always discussed. Not just with new public management. Before new public management, there was the new public administration that came out of the Minnowbrook movement in the United States, which focused on the need for public administrators to be advocates on behalf of social equity and advocates on behalf of the poor and the like. Before that, or subsequent to that, there was the Al Gore reinventing government effort, which some tied into sort of the American version of new public management, and which most of the studies of the impact of the Gore effort confirm my point. It had very little impact in terms of real significant consequence in terms of American government. But before the Gore reinventing government, there was the Grace Commission, which was a major effort of the Nixon administration in terms of reforming government. And before the Grace Commission, there were the different Hoover commissions. And before that, if one wants to go back into one's history of the United States, there were the various reform initiatives in the very founding years, first years of the country that Leonard White details in his 4-volume administrative history series of the first 30 or 40 years of the history of the United States. But the historic fact, history does play a significant role in understanding the fact that we are constantly trying to reform government. And that has to do with the fact that from the very origins of the United States as a country, there is a fundamental distrust of government. We talk about distrust of government, whether it's in Asia or whether it's in Europe, and certainly we talk about the concerns about distrust of government in the United States. But one of the things we often forget when we're talking about this is it's only in the 1930s with the Franklin Roosevelt administration and the kind of things that Roosevelt did, that we ever really trusted government in the United States. And even there was bitter divide over this question. So that when we talk about the United States ending some of its progressive policies or not pursuing progressive policies, we often forget that the United States is really a fundamentally very conservative country, in part because of these origins of the country. It's a country that came together when 13 colonies, who in most cases fundamentally distrusted one another. The southern colonies worried significantly over the likelihood of the northern colonies trying to destroy the southern colonies' economy by eliminating slavery. And in turn, the southern colonies felt that the northern colonies were all essentially grubby entrepreneurs, not refined, gentle people, etc., as the southern planters were. So what do you do when you're trying to put together a country of people who fundamentally distrust one another? Well, you ensure that it is as decentralized as possible, that as much authority as possible is contained at the lowest levels of government. And that's partly what explains the fact that, you know, you go to a continent like Africa, you have about 25,000 local governments. A continent like South America, you have about 17,000 local governments, which includes 5,000 in Brazil alone. And in contrast, the United States, you're talking about 88,000 local governments, not to mention the 50 state governments. And in fact, this is where the real administrative authority of the country lies. The federal government employs and has, since World War II, employed about 2 million people. Another 500,000 work for the Postal Service, which was semi-autonomous, and another 1.5 million in the military, CIA, etc. So they're, even including all of the defense, military, intelligence sort of stuff, you're talking about a national government that employs 4 million people, in contrast to state and local governments that employ around 14 million people. So if you really want to look at the administrative authority of the United States, particularly if you're interested in domestic social policies, education, welfare, etc., you're really talking about the state and local level. And there again, as I suggested a couple of moments ago, you have got this huge diversity of approaches that make it very, very hard to make generalizations about how we do government and the like. Certainly some of the local governments will engage in trying to adopt and implement various of the aspects of new public management. For others, they don't even know it exists or that it ever existed, or wouldn't know what you were talking about if you mentioned the concept of new public management. But I will say again, and emphasize the point, that is not to say that we don't have a great interest in attempting to reform government. That's partly because, as I suggested, historically we think government is essentially a bad thing and want to ensure that we can reform it as much as possible. Some of this also comes from the fact that we do have a substantial turnover in administrative leadership with our election processes, and particularly at the national government, there has been a fairly dramatic change over the last 60, 70 years in terms of the extensiveness of the growth of political appointees in terms of leading the government. If you go back to the mid-1960s, looking at the most important of our national government entities, what was then called the Bureau of the Budget, now is the Office of Management and Budget. In the mid-1960s, there were 2 political appointees at the old Bureau of the Budget. There was the director and the deputy director. And that was basically, the third person in the hierarchy was a professional civil servant who got there as a consequence of promotion through the ranks of civil service. Today, there are over 100 political appointees at the Office of Management and Budget, which is essentially the same thing. They added management to the name to give it a little bit more cachet. But that, in a way, is since a last achievement maybe of public administration as a professional field in terms of its impact on American government. It was, in fact, in the days when professional public administrators made their way to the top of the government, that they decided it should be an Office of Management and Budget, not just simply a Bureau of the Budget. But as they made that change, the political changes were occurring that were introducing more and more political people into the upper levels of the national government, and consequently lessening the role of public administrators professional public administrators in terms of their impact on the national government. You can see this, and you can see the impact it has in the politicization of the upper levels of the national government, in the sense of the difficulty in many ways of professional public administration having an impact on the government. If you go back 60 years or so ago, you had a number of people who emerged through the public administration ranks, many of them beginning in the days of Franklin Roosevelt, the latter part of the Roosevelt administration, and made their way up through the processes, up from step to step, position to position, up the government hierarchy. And these were people who actually had a sensitivity toward public administration as a discipline, in part because they came out of that discipline, and they were much more inclined to try to introduce the kind of good government reforms we talk about in public administration into the government. But as the upper levels have changed in American government, become much more politicized, you don't have the same opportunity for people who reflect the views of professional public administration, academic public administration, to actually have much of an impact in American government. I mean, you don't have a situation like France, for instance, where most often most of the top level people have been trained in a strong public administration program at the National School of Administration. In the United States, people come into public administration through many, many different routes. Many of them never have any training in public administration as a field. In fact, public administration training probably has a lot more impact at the local levels in the United States than it does in our national government. So the result is that even if someone wanted to introduce major changes in our government reflecting new public management kinds of theories, you don't have people at the upper levels of government who would be very receptive or very interested. However, having said that, many of their political views, many of their political biases reflect many of the basic ideas of new public management, in the sense that they're inclined toward minimizing regulation, minimizing government involvement, decentralizing as much as possible, contracting out as much as possible. But again, those are much more a reflection of the basic American political ideology, and were prevalent and prominent in American government and American public management for 100 years prior to whenever anybody created the notion of new public management. So on that, I think I'll stop for the moment.
Thank you very much, Professor. So we can continue with Professor Bartoli. She can try to make reference to your different topics, because you have a large way to explain us how it works now with diversity and centrality and so on. So please.
Thank you. It's a real honor to be here, because I don't know why Professor Pupion asked me to represent France in this panel, but I'm very honored, and I thank him very much. There are so many distinguished scholars in this room who could have been here at my place. So it's an honor. It's different from your situation and your situation, but it's also a very important challenge, because at the difference of Professor CHOI and Professor ROSENBAUM, since I am not the only one to be able to speak about France here, I am very scrutinized by all my colleagues, and if I say something wrong or stupid, they will notice it. But what you said, no one is able to check and to see if it is true or not. So this is a real challenge for me. So thank you, Pierre, for this wonderful opportunity for me to represent France in this panel. Also, I don't know if it is a coincidence, but I'm also the representative of the feminine part of the world. So on this panel, so which is a second responsibility on my shoulders. So I hope I will say a few things that will be interesting for all of you. But mainly, I would like to start with the question that is raised on the title of the panel. It's about the possible universality of new public management. And I would like just to mention that, according to me, there is a strong ambiguity about the expression new public management. And I'm not sure that it means the same in the various countries, especially, not only the countries, but I mean everywhere. I mean the meanings are so multiple. And I think that the first ambiguity and the first way to answer the question is that it doesn't mean the same, it doesn't evoke the same aspects about public action, and that's a real source of confusion. What I think is that there are some common backgrounds that we share probably when we speak about new public management. And those common backgrounds, I think, were exemplified by your presentation and yours too, because we all can say that we feel the need to modernize public action because the context is changing, because the governments are here in each of our countries, but the context in which they have to operate has changed. The complexity of the situations, of the environment, the world context and its challenges, all these lead each government with its particularities to feel the need to modernize, and the population feels it too. So this can be a common background that we all share, and I'm sure that my French colleagues will agree that the need of modernization or the need of reform or improvement in the public action is still present nowadays, and this is a common background. Also, I think that we share, and what you said confirms this idea, I think, that we share that the principle according to which lawmaking, law implementation cannot be anymore the core, or not enough. I mean, it's not enough to be the core of public action. We need other references, we need other paradigms, and not only the legal aspects of government procedures and so on. So this is also maybe a common background. And also, we can find in the various representations of new public management around the world, I think we can find also the idea that the public and the private sectors could be somewhat reconciliated in some aspects of their ways of operating. But the somewhat is extremely important, and it depends to what extent you speak about. Because I think that it's a difference regarding what you were mentioning about the US. I think that in the French culture, the French history, the French representation, it's not a distrust that the citizens have toward the government and the public actions. On the contrary, it's something very strong and very noble. The history and the representations, the traditional representations about government, about public servants, about public service is quite high. It's a high value. It's something very noble, and this is part of the history of the country and of the cultural dimension of the French institutions. So the idea is not to reduce and minimize the role of public service or public action, but the idea is maybe to improve it, of course, to introduce the principle of management systems and management methods, but not as much as in other countries, privatize, to have a private sector for public goods, or to have externalization or outsourcing of public actions and so on. So this is a strong difference, and it's also a strong difference, according to me, for what we put behind the expression new public management. It's much more a kind of hybrid compromise, I would say, between the methods of the private activity and the methods of the public activity, with the idea that we could reconcile the two words while respecting and keeping the core values of the public service. And this is, according to me, particularly French, and of course this will be maybe a debate with the people in the room. So when we think about new public management, we do not have the same ideas in mind, and this is really related to the country, not only the country, but at least the country. So there could be some universal principles or orientations, but depending on the particular situation of each country, you cannot answer yes to the question. I have already the conclusion, but I have many things to add before going back to the conclusion. So when you were mentioning the reforms in your country, it's hard to know where to start when you think about the history, of course, because, well, we cannot start to the birth of our country. It's too far away. We cannot. You can. I don't know about you. I don't know enough about the history of your country. But we cannot go back. We cannot get back to the birth of our country. So when we usually speak about public management or new public management, we get back to the 20th century, especially, and this is also a particularity of our country, especially because the word management was not used before that in France for public action. Management is quite, when you combine it to public, it's quite recent. I mean, half a century ago, something like that. And it's something that, it's not a coincidence, and it's not just a question of vocabulary. It's very important also when you relate it to the cultural basis of public administration. I think that public management was even not used in the 50s and in the 60s in France, and it's still a taboo in some of our administrations. You cannot use the word management that easily, for instance, in the world of education, high school. If you speak to an high school leader, well, if you say public management, well, they look at you just like if you were saying something very inappropriate. It's not something that is very frequently used. So I think that if you think at it, you can get back to, well, I mean, if you do not use the word, but you look at the essence, the existence of the reforms, we could get back to the RCB, for instance, the rationalization of budget choices in France, which was inspired by the PPBS, the American PPBS of the American administration, because it was maybe the first time when there was a mention of objectives, of evaluation. You were mentioning evaluation. That was I would say the roots of the idea of evaluation at the organizational level, not at the individual level in France. So that's maybe the beginning of the idea of public management in France. But our fathers and mothers at this period didn't use the word and the expression public management. And then another important step, I think, in the French history, please correct me and protest if you do not agree, but another important step was the government circular from Rocard, the first prime minister in France in 1989, with the renouveau du service public, the renewal of public service. That was a very significant step about modernizing public action and modernizing government activities, because for the first time there was an official text. It was just a circular, not a law, not something strong in the law systems, in the regulations in France, but very, very significant, because for the first time the notions of human resource management with the civil servants was emphasized, as well as the relationship with the citizens, and also the question of evaluation again, and all those aspects were present in this government circular for the first time. However, even at this period, the expression public management was not used. And what is interesting when you look at this vocabulary is that the revolution starts when you start using public management in France, okay? And when you start thinking that management is not reserved to profit sector, to the profit sector, but that you can use the management systems and tools in order to serve the public action and to serve the public service. And this is a completely cultural change that happened, and it's not over, in the late 20th century, really. So, and it's very, very important to note that. I think there is a professor, an American professor, Lawrence Lynn, from the University of Chicago, maybe, don't know exactly, who said something very interesting in a chapter of a collective book about the comparison between the American way of considering public action and the European way of considering public action. He said that the distinction that is most important in the US, according to him, is the distinction between the private management and public management and the way they interfere each other. And he says that in Europe, and especially in France, it's not where the distinction relies on mainly. The main distinction is between public administration and public management, public administration versus public management. And this is, I think, a very interesting nuance that is raising, because it's something very, very significant according to me. So again, for getting back to the idea of new public management, I think that it doesn't have the same meaning, and it's not a universal concept. If I just go on quickly, I don't want to, of course, list all the reforms that our governments in France had to run about how to modernize the government, because, as you said, it's still an ongoing process. We could, of course, also mention a very important, significant reform that was a law this time regarding finance and public finances, or what we call LOLF, into one. And this is a very strong modification of the public finance system in France, which was sometimes called the financial constitution or something like that, or the relation to the constitution of France is sometimes mentioned, because in this law at the beginning, well, it's 16 years ago, about the idea of having goals, having priorities, and also giving the people, the democratic process of giving the parliament the role of discussing the financial attributions of the means, of the French means, and the possibility to think about pluriannual allocation of means to the government actions. All this was completely new, completely renewed, and it accompanied the idea of having public managers who were in charge of those financial aspects of the public action. So all this was considered, was voted, was implemented, but as always, implementation sometimes is confronted to difficulties with the concrete world and with the concrete constraints. And there is, for all those reforms and many others that I didn't mention, there is always a huge gap between the intent and the concretization and the concrete implementation of those reforms. And I also would like to mention something about the RGPP, la révision générale des politiques publiques, the general review of public policies that was implemented a few years after the LOLF. And you may remember, maybe those who were there yesterday morning, our commissaire en chef of the armies, I don't know if he's here. He has gone. Okay, so too bad, because he mentioned something about RGPP. I don't know if you remember that. And he said that it was the reduction of the number of civil servants in the armies, and which is very significant because RGPP became that. I mean, it was not the original idea of this reform, which was, on the contrary, to think about strategic orientations and strategic redefinition of the public actions. But in the implementation processes, everyone translated it in reduction of means, reduction of costs, and reduction of civil servants and public agents in the services. And for most of the public managers, it's something bad. I mean, RGPP is something bad. So the spirit of the reform has been transformed in the implementation. And the spirit of the reform, with the idea of thinking about strategy for public action, has become something very bad and just related to cost and means and number of people. So it lost the sense, the real sense of the reforms. And this is just an example, because I think that most reforms have this final result at the end. And that's the reason why we still have to reinvent government. That's the reason why we still have to find new reforms, new kinds of ideas and of projects in order to modernize our systems, not only in the intent and in the discourse and in the speeches, but also in the actions. And it's a question of managing change. And the process is at least as important as the content, but most reforms did not include that. So that's what I could say for France. I don't know.
Thank you very much, Annie. I think it's a very little summarize about this very large topic. And I would like to continue with this dialogue and to ask Professor CHOI about one question that we have all together. Is the public management research sector that you can improve, you have structure, you have organization in South Korea, First question. And the second question, because Professor Rosenbaum said that there is no specific training, everybody can become servant, public servant, and so on in US. And is it the case in South Korea? And have you some specific training system? And because we know that in France, we said something about that, about an ENA, National Administration School, or about our program in the university, and so on and so on. And do you have specific research sector and specific training programs for this kind of position?
Actually, the public management, the word has not been around for many decades. Actually, it is rather new. So still, the public administration in South Korea is big. Is a big research and educational sector. In South Korea, we have about 230 four-year universities. Out of that, when it comes to my Association of Public Administration, we have about 200 the programs, professors in those programs joining our association. So meaning that we have about 200 public administration or similar programs out of 230 universities. And then they don't use Department of Public Management. They use Department of Public Administration. Yeah. Public management is not, I think it is rather the researcher's word. They don't use, the practitioners, they don't use public management. It's still public administration. And also we do have a training institute it's not like ENA, but in the context of a South Korean public service, there are two ways basically to recruit people. One is to have a test. Entrance test. For example, for the middle management, you have to, which starts at grade 5 out of grade 9. Each year, the Korean central government recruit about 350 grade 5 new people. And then out of that, about 200 are through the entrance examination, which is very, very difficult and stringent. And other 150 or so are actually recruited on the basis of their merit. If they have, for example, a PhD degree in certain area, although they have a certain good amount of experience, they can be recruited. And then in the government, they do have official training center, which is, and also regional government also do have their own training centers. And then when it comes to the management, the word management, how important that word is in South Korea. I should say up until late 90s, we didn't really have the performance evaluation. It was more of an implementation of law. So there were positions in Korean word. There's a 심사 평가. There's a 심사 stands for inspection and evaluation. What they did was that they inspect whether the project is going on as scheduled. It's a project or a business is another enterprise. A program is going on as scheduled. They will allot the budget. That's what they did. They will check whether there is illegality or not. If it is illegal, if they go on schedule, they will be provided by the financial resources. That's what they did. But after 90, maybe from 90s, the late 90s, they did start the evaluation. Then also the scheme for pay per performance, this has been adopted. So out of that, South Korea, some people are talking is a republic of evaluation these days. But there is a growing maybe suspicion about the validity of that pay per performance scheme, and then I'm not quite sure. There will be some reflections. There has been some reflections, especially in academia, also in public sector organizations, public corporations, public enterprises. Is this a real good scheme to be applied in the public sector? And also the current regime, the new president, current new government, they are, I think, more suspicious about that pay per performance scheme. They would be they were more of quite fascinated with the term of management. Anyway, the South Korea, under the tradition of there was a bureaucracy for thousands of years. Actually, the Confucianism is a very secular, rational kind of ideology. Is ideology, a political ideology to run the state, to run the government. Very secular and rational. So to them, management, I think even though they use administration, it was there. Even in Joseon dynasty, there was a concept of management. But it is rather I don't know whether it was a novel thing or not, but it's a public administration, but they had the respect for management. So that's what I can say.
That's very interesting, and it was a question from Professor Bartoli about the history of the meaning of administration and so on. And what you said about the PhD is very interesting, and I am sure that Professor Rosenbaum can say something about the valorization of PhD in public management in US. Is it possible to be integrated in a high position with PhD and so on?
Well, it won't hurt you. Whether it helps you is another issue. Generally speaking, our government has tended to be, I'd argue, a little less preoccupied with degrees, and actually many of the people in the national government come with degrees from the specialized area of their agency. So, for instance, people in the Department of Agriculture would have gotten their bachelor's degree, or if they have a master's degree, often in the field of agriculture. People in the Social Security Administration are just as likely to come with degrees in social work or social policy as they are with degrees in public administration. Over the course of the period, beginning with in the 1960s, when there really did become the first sort of major effort to have within national government agencies units that addressed public policy evaluation, those units became places where people with PhDs would migrate to. So that if you, and particularly, quite frankly, from more from the Kennedy School at Harvard than most places, there became to be something of a pipeline between getting your PhD at the Kennedy School and going to work in one of the national government departments in the unit in that department that dealt with program evaluation, program development, although quite frankly those were always small units within national government agencies. In general, you know, as I say, it won't hurt you to have a PhD in whether it's government or public management in terms of going into a government position, whether it's national, state, or local. But does it really make a huge difference for you? I would argue probably not. Certainly if you want to go into academic life, then it's essentially a requirement. I did want to make one comment about the public management, public policy, public administration distinctions that you were raising, and the comments by Larry Lynn that you noted. That's an interesting issue in the United States, the terminology public management, public policy, public administration. It often has, interestingly, significant clashes of personalities and egos connected with it. I'm sort of thinking about one of the, certainly some of the first programs in the United States concerned with either public policy or public management were in fact efforts at rejecting public administration as a field, and often were the manifestations of personal conflicts between individuals. For instance, the public policy school at the University of California, Berkeley, for many, many years, Dwight Waldo and Fritz Mosier, two important figures traditionally in American public administration, had lobbied and worked within the bureaucracy at the University of California, Berkeley, to create a school of public administration. At the last moment, as the university was about to create this school, this is in the mid-1960s, another famous figure in American public administration, Aaron Wildavsky, essentially was able to politically lobby within the university and become the founder of this school, not Waldo or Mosier. And that in turn was reflected, or the logic for this was, if Wildavsky headed it, it would be a public management school, whereas the school that Waldo and Mosier had been trying to create was a public administration school. And public management was more modern, more relevant than was public administration. The same kind of set of issues also are reflected in the creation of the Kennedy School. I mean, many people think the Kennedy School was the first, sort of public management-oriented school at Harvard, but the truth of the matter was that Harvard had a public administration school that dated from the 1930s, but the Littauer School. But there was a set of conflicts in the Harvard political science department, as well as in the economics department, and essentially the Kennedy School was established as a, quote, public management school, and the Littauer School of Public Administration was essentially abolished, although the name still floats around the Harvard University. I think the building the government department is in is still called the Littauer Center or something. But it's interesting. I mean, a lot of this difference in approaches in the United States, as much as anything, reflects academic rivalries and, who wound up on top in a particular internal university dogfight.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm sure that we have an analysis to do in all the European countries, for example, to try to understand how it works, where is the boundaries between public administration and the public management. Because if we go on the details of programs, in Germany, for example, because I know the system, or in Poland, it is probable that we don't have a lot of difference, and perhaps Professor Bartoli can say something about this point, because in France, I don't want to say anything about the France, but in France we can have such similitude, such very confused frontiers between, and it is more perhaps a history or a way to recruit people, like in France, that confirm that we continue to have such different way. The other point that it's about PhD, because in France the PhD in management and public management is clearly for academic careers, because we have a very big problem with valorization of PhD outside, and not only in public administration, also in enterprise, in companies, and so on. It is not only in our field. And in Europe, it is not the case in almost the country, as you know. And it's why we have to work about that also, because it is our responsibility altogether, I mean. So, Professor Bartoli, perhaps you can conclude with this question, because I know that a lot of people have planned now, so...
Okay.
One comment. Do you want to add your comment now, maybe?
It's a brief comment about the PhD thing. Because so I like to avoid the impression that in South Korean bureaucracy, it is the main track is the people who enter the bureaucracy through the examination. They are the main bureaucrats, and then, but increasingly, people are coming in on the basis of their merit, and then grade 5 is a middle management, and then there is a growing need for more of an analytic, the jobs. So the PhD degree, or because we don't have for example, DPA, there is no such thing as DPA system. But there is one evidence of your merit, or if you have a certain good amount of the expertise in certain areas, you can be recruited. But normally, if it is a grade 5 or equivalent positions, probably people, if it has to do with the analysis, people will respect. You have to have a certain PhD, doctoral level training or skill. Otherwise, they will not accept. That's actually what I was pointing at. But the main body is the people who entered as they graduate from the undergraduate bachelor with the bachelor's degree, and then pass the examination. They will go on. South Korea does not have it's more of general scheme. I mean, this is not the position-based. They don't really have a position-based personnel management.
Thank you. So.
Yeah, thank you. The first comment that I would like to mention is about the distinction between public administration, public management, public policies, because I noticed that the 3 countries that we represent this afternoon had this question at some point of their development of reforms in government. So the question is not only French, and which is very interesting. Also, we have also to keep in mind that there is the problem of translation, that sometimes it's not easy maybe to translate and to do the difference between administration and management in some languages. I don't know in yours, but it could happen, I guess. And so I think that's we all have to still work on the possible differences among those terms that we use, and knowing that again the representations of each term is not the same according to the countries. The second comment that I wanted to raise here is, or not to discourage our PhD students in public management, even though it's quite rare that our politicians are graduated with a PhD nowadays, and it's true that it's mainly present in academia, the PhD graduated people in public management. I think, and I'm quite optimistic about it, I think that there is a movement and an evolution. And what we were saying altogether about the rise and the development of public management can be an opportunity for our universities and schools in management in France to show that research can be done on this topic, and that our politicians and our civil servants have to be aware of that, and it's our responsibility in the universities also to do the link with the politicians and the high public servants who represent our countries in governments and in local governments too. So there is a place to take, I think, for research in public management, and there is a place to take not only in academia but also in relationship with the governments and whatever the level is, national government or local government administrations. So that's a call and that's an encouragement for all the PhD students in the room. What I would like to say also about the training system for our politicians and our civil servants and officials is that we still have, of course, the majority of our public managers, either politicians or administrators, who come from ENA, which is a particularity of our country, the National School of Administration. And well, it's not in itself, it's not a problem, I think. I don't know. We have all various opinions about ENA, but well, in itself, it's not a problem. What could be a question is to understand why and to what extent there was a shift in the objectives of ENA, and I mean, not depending on them, but the result is that ENA was supposed to train civil servants, administrators, civil administrators. That's the reason why it was created. I mean, it was created to have a real profession of civil administrators, civil servant administrators, very skilled for addressing the challenges of our country. And I mean, I didn't get back to Napoleon, but I mean, it's related to the Napoleon history too. And so the idea and the purpose of the creation of such a particular school in our country is the idea of having professionals, skilled civil servants to lead the public service. Not to train the politicians. But when you see the result is that most of our politicians, presidents of the republic, the ministers and so on, come from ENA. So there is a kind of distortion in the initial goal of the creation of this school and the reality nowadays. And so the good point is that they have a training, and as you said, but maybe it's not true for everyone in all the countries. They have a training, and they have a particular training. However, it means that there is a kind of monopoly of training and ways of thinking, you know, at the head of the country, not only among the civil servants who occupy the high positions in the administrations, but also among the politicians. At the local government level, it's a bit different, but we have also a school which is more recent, which is specialized in the training of the local government civil servants, and it's a little bit different. I mean, the mayors and so on. It's another story. However, when you look at the national politicians, you have this majority of people coming from the same school. So the question is not for me, according to me, it's not to question the validity and the quality of the school, but to question the need of a diversity of profiles that we could need in our governors, in the large meaning of the term. So that's a question. About the content of the training. It's something that has evolved when you look at ENA again, because you cannot mention training for public managers in France without mentioning ENA. They have introduced the field of management and public management recently in their curriculum, but it's recent. I mean, it was mainly first ENA is not the main training, and main training is usually Sciences Po Paris, particularly, and then ENA. And ENA is the kind of end of the process for the civil administrators. At first, they didn't have management, and they didn't have the questions of strategy, organization, human resources management, and so on in their curriculum. However, it's growing. The part of those fields is growing in their training, but traditionally it was law, of course, and political science, but we can say administrative science, that was the vocabulary, the appropriate vocabulary, and a bit of public economy, but not very much about management. So again, we, as specialists, most of us, specialists of management and management science, we have to take this place and this opportunity to create an awareness about the need to have people specialized in management and in the particularity of management applied to the public sector, and through our research and through our training, and also in continuing education for public managers and so on, to, according to me, increase the level of knowledge and skills of our officials, our politicians in those topics, because they are very skilled usually in political science, in law, and in other disciplines, but not that much in management. So, that's also a French particularity.
Thank you very much. I'm sure that we are at time. Incredible. So I want to thank you very much, Professor CHOI, Professor Rosenbaum. And in 2 weeks we will have a conference in Georgetown, and it is in partnership with AIRMAP. So we continue to be with US colleagues with this conference about social responsibility. And after that we will participate to a conference in South Korea in your university. So we will continue this roundtable in USA in 2 weeks, and in South Korea in 3 weeks. So it will be a continuity of this debate. So thank you very much, and thank you to the board of AIRMAP.